My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. In a few minutes, I'll talk about the continued assaults on our freedoms and why it's time to think the unthinkable. The chair of Republicans Overseas UK will discuss the FBI's raid on Donald Trump's home, plus a look at the crisis that's affecting dog rescue centres up and down the country. All of that and more coming up, but first an update on the latest news from Bethany Elsey.
Neil, thank you. Good evening. I am Bethany Elsey, here to bring you up to date from the GB newsroom. So Salman Rushdie's alleged attacker has been charged with attempted murder and assault. US officials identified the suspect as 24-year-old Hadi Mattar from New Jersey. The motive for the assault is not yet known, but police believe the suspect was acting alone. Earlier today, the author's agent confirmed Mr. Rushdie's on a ventilator and that he may lose an eye after he was repeatedly stabbed on stage at an event in New York State yesterday. He's faced several death threats over his writing, most notably from the Iran's leader in the 1980s, over the publication of the Satanic Verses. There are warnings drought conditions in parts of England could last until next year. England is experiencing its driest summer for 50 years, and the Environment Agency says it would take weeks' worth of rain to replenish water sources. More extreme heat is expected in the south of the country this weekend, while the north is set to be hit by thunderstorms and floods. Amber weather warnings have been issued. Dr. Simon Boxall is a senior lecturer of oceanography, and he told GB News there could be more droughts in the future.
You compare us now to 1976, when we had the last big drought, we are much better prepared than we used to be. But you have got what is, tragically, a sort of a series of events which has brought this very, very dry weather. And I think we do need to think about this in the future, because we are going to see more of these droughts.
Rail passengers face further disruption as drivers at 9 train companies walk out over jobs, pay and conditions. Members of the ASLEF union, that represents train drivers, joined picket lines in northwest London this morning. Several lines are affected, including services along the west coast, LNER, London Overground and South Eastern. Some parts of the country have no services at all. The Welsh Secretary has become the first Cabinet Minister to publicly switch sides in the Tory leadership race, putting his support behind Liz Truss. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, Sir Robert Buckland says he believes the Foreign Secretary's economic policy would help the country through the cost of living crisis. Speaking to Esther and Philip, Brexit Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg also said he's backing Liz Truss.
I think having somebody who understands that what they thought earlier in life isn't right, and particularly with the referendum, accepts enthusiastically what the British people gave her to deal with. And she's not alone in that. I've always thought the most impressive Remainers are the ones who, once the result came in, said, OK, that's it, I'm accepting it, and I want now to do it properly. And there are a number of those. There are quite a lot who say that and don't really mean it. But I found in government that Liz, other than the Prime Minister himself, was my greatest supporter for getting Brexit opportunities.
The FBI has seized several top-secret files during a search at Donald Trump's estate in Florida. A federal judge approved a warrant to carry out a search at the former president's Mar-a-Lago property. It's after the US government said it's possible he had violated the Espionage Act, a law that prohibits passing on or keeping national defence information. Mr. Trump has denied any wrongdoing and says that the documents were declassified. Over 11 tonnes of dead fish have been pulled from a river on the Polish-German border as officials warn of possible contamination. The reason for the mass dying of fish in the River Oder is still unknown. The Polish Prime Minister says it's likely chemical waste may have been dumped into it. He added that the river may take years to return to its normal state. And record numbers of people are getting checked for bowel cancer following the death of Dame Deborah James. The NHS has praised her campaigning and said their figures show over 170,000 people went for checks between May and July. Dame Deborah, known as Bowel Babe, died from the disease at the end of June, aged 40. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now let's get back to Neil.
Thanks, Bethany. It's hard to think the unthinkable, but there comes a time when there's nothing else for it. People raised to trust the powers that be, who have assumed, like I once did, that the state, regardless of its political flavour at any given moment, is essentially benevolent and well-meaning, will naturally try and keep that assumption of benevolence in mind when trying to make sense of what's going on around them. People like us, you and me, raised in the understanding that we are free, that we have inalienable rights, and that the institutions of this country have our best interests at heart, will tend to tie ourselves in knots rather than contemplate the idea those authorities might actually be working against us now. I took that thought of benevolent, well-meaning authority for granted for most of my life. God help me. Not to put too fine a point on it, I was as gullible as the next chump. A couple of years ago, however, I began to think the unthinkable, and with every passing day it becomes more and more obvious to me that we are no longer being treated as individuals entitled to try and make the most of our lives, but as a barn full of battery hens, just another product to be bought and sold down the river. Let me put it another way. If you've been driving yourself almost demented in an effort to think the best of those in charge, those in senior positions in government, those in charge of the great institutions of state, those running the big corporations, but finding it increasingly impossible to do so, then the solution to the problem might be to turn your point of view through 180 degrees and accept, however unwillingly, that we are, how best to put this, being taken for a ride. When you find a stranger's hand on your wallet in the inside pocket of your jacket, rather than trying to persuade yourself he's only making sure it doesn't fall out, it might be more straightforward to draw the conclusion you're in the process of being robbed. Once the scales fall from a person's eyes, the resultant clarity of sight is briefly overwhelming. Or it's like being handed a skeleton key that opens every locked door, or access to a Rosetta Stone that translates every word into a language instantly understood. Take the energy crisis. If you felt the blood drain from your face at the prospect of bills rising from hundreds to several thousands of pounds, while reading about energy companies doubling their profits overnight, while being commanded to subsidise so-called renewables that are anything but green, while listening to this politician or that renew their vows to the ruinous fantasies of net zero and Agenda 2030, while knowing that the electricity for electric cars comes in the main and most reliably from fossil fuels, if you can't make sense of it all and just know that it adds up to a future in which you might have to choose between eating and heating, then treat yourself to the gift of understanding that the powers that be fully intend that we should have less heat and less fuel, and that in the planned future only the rich will have cars anyway. The plan is not to fix it, the plan is to break it and leave it broken. If you struggle to think the best of the world's richest, vacuous, self-obsessed A-list celebrities among them, endlessly circling the planet on private jets and super yachts so as to attend get-togethers where they might pontificate to us lowly proles about how we must give up our cars and occasional holiday flights, even meat on the dinner table. If you wonder how they have the unmitigated gall, then isn't it easier simply to accept that their honestly declared and advertised intention is that their luxurious and pampered lives will continue as before, while we are left hungry, cold and mostly unwashed in our unheated homes? Here's the thing. If any leader or celeb honestly meant a word of their sermons about CO2 and the rest, then they would obviously lead by example. They would be first of all of us, willingly giving up international travel altogether. They would downsize to modest homes warmed by heat pumps. They would eschew all energy but that from the sun and the wind. They would eat with relish bugs and plants. They would resort to walking, bicycles and public transport. If net zero and the rest was about the good of the planet and not about clearing the skies and the beaches of scum like us, don't you think those sainted politicians and A-listers would be lighting the way for us by their own example? If the way of life they preach at us was worth living, wouldn't they be living it already? Perhaps you heard Bill Gates say private jets are his guilty pleasure. And how about food, and more particularly the predicted shortage of it? The suits and CEOs blame it all on Vladimir Putin. But if the countries of the world are truly running out of food, why is our government offering farmers hundreds of thousands of pounds to get out of the industry and sell their land to transnational corporations for use or disuse unknown? Why aren't we as a society doing what our parents and grandparents did during World War II and digging for victory? Why is the government intent on turning a third of our fertile soil over to rewilding schemes that make life better only for the beavers? Why aren't we looking across the North Sea towards the Netherlands, where a WEF-infected administration is bullying farmers off their land altogether, forcing them to cull half the national herd? Those Dutch farmers are among the most productive and knowledgeable in the world, holding in their heads and hands the answers to all manner of questions about how best to produce food. And yet their government is so intent on scaring them out of the business that a teenage boy in a tractor taking part in a protest to defend ancient rights and traditions was fired on by police. Why do you think it matters so much to the government of the second most productive population of farmers in the world to gut and fillet that industry? Why? Why have similar protests in countries all across Europe and the wider world been largely ignored by the mainstream media, a media that would have crawled on its hands and knees over broken glass just to report on a BLM protester opening a bag of non-binary crisps? Why the silence on the attack on farming? And while we're on the subject of farmland ownership, why is computer salesman Bill Gates buying so much farmland in the US, more than 250,000 acres in 19 states at the last count, while simultaneously promoting the production and sale of fake meat? And why have so many small planes crashed into massive food processing plants in the US, sparking fires and thereby hobbling the production and distribution of yet more of the very stuff of life? Why is this happening to farmers and farming all across the hitherto developed world? Isn't the simple, obvious answer the answer that makes most sense and that is staring us in our trusting faces, that power for the power-hungry has always rested most effectively upon control of food and its supply? Why are the powers that be attributing this to a cost of living crisis, when everyone with 2 brain cells to rub together can see it's a cost of lockdown crisis, the inevitable consequence of shutting down the whole country, indeed the whole world, for the best part of 2 years? Soaring inflation, rising interest rates, disrupted supply chains. Might they be calling it a cost of living crisis as part of their barefaced attempt to distract us from the fact that while ordinary individuals face a life and death struggle in the coming months, the corporations have celebrated their share of the greatest transfer of wealth in history? Doesn't that seem more likely? However unthinkable, might it not be more compelling to ask why our government and governments around the world have effectively stood by and held the coats of huge corporations while those money magnates pulled almost all of the world's wealth into their already creaking coffers? Are our governments more interested in enabling, in aiding and abetting the rich than in lifting so much as a finger to protect our livelihoods, our ways of life? I'm only asking. What about the money in our pockets? Why is it getting harder and harder to use good old cash, notes and coins? Why are we being nudged further and further away from spending power we can see and hold, and towards a digital alternative that exists only on the hard drives of the banks that run the world? Why is that, do you think? rather than dismiss as yet another conspiracy theory the idea of cash being ultimately replaced with transactions based on the exchange of what amount to glorified food stamps that will only be accepted if our social credit score demonstrates that we've been obedient girls or boys. How about taking the leap and focusing on the blatantly obvious, that if we're not free to buy whatever and whenever we please, free of the surveillance and snooping of governments and the banks that run them, then we have absolutely no freedom at all. And while we're on the subject of money and banks, why not pause to notice something else that's glaringly obvious, which is to say that the currencies of the West are teetering on the abyss, and that one bank after another is revealed to those who are bothering to watch as being as close to bankruptcy as it's possible to be without actually falling over the edge. Then there's the so-called vaccines for COVID. I deliberately say so-called because by now it should be clear to all but the willfully blind that those injections do not work as advertised. You can still contract the virus, still transmit the virus, still get sick from the virus, and still die of the virus. Denmark has dropped their use for under 18s. All across the world, every day, more evidence emerges, however grudgingly, however much the various complicit authorities and big pharma companies might hate to admit it, of countless deaths and injuries caused by those medical procedures. And yet here in Britain, and just about everywhere else, governments continue to try and get those needles into as many arms as possible, even the arms of the smallest and youngest. The ripe stink of corruption is everywhere. I trusted authority for most of my life. Now I ask myself on a daily basis how I ignored the stench for so long. Across the Atlantic, the Biden White House sent the FBI to raid the home of former President Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Joe Biden and his son, Hunter, he of the laptop full of the most appalling and incriminating content, fly together on Air Force One. No raids planned on the Obamas, nor on the Clintons. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi flew to Taiwan and onwards to China. Her son Paul, an investor in a Chinese tech firm and with seats on the board of companies dealing in lithium, was along for the ride into that part of the world where 3/4 of the world's lithium batteries are made. Taiwan leads in that technology. It's hard to think the unthinkable. It's hard to think that all of it, all the misery, all the suffering of the past and to come might just be about money, greed and power. It's hard to tell yourself you've been taken for a fool and taken for a ride. It's hard, but the view from the other side is worth the effort and the pain. Open your eyes and see. All of that is my opinion, of course, and you're free to disagree. Keep your tweets and emails coming all through the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk and you can tweet me as well @gbnews, and I will try to get to as many as possible of your comments later in the show if time allows. I'm joined this evening by the author and journalist Laura Dodsworth, a regular guest on this show, and Benjamin Loughnane, who's our research fellow at the Bow Group. Welcome both. Laura, you listened to my tale of woe there. Is it just me, or does it in any way chime with you that simple explanations sometimes work? That if something's not working anymore, it's because it's not meant to?
It chimes with me, but I don't want it to. I love your monologues. Lots of people love.
I feel the butt coming.
Here we go. Lots of people love your monologues. When I tweeted I was going to be on the show tonight, people said they've missed your monologues. They're glad you're back from your holiday. But you do have a real knack of delivering a monologue, which is quietly devastating and deeply unsettling, because you covered a lot of terrain there, and it feels like there's a stream of truth that runs through the whole thing. There's so many things that don't add up, that feel unsettling, very disquieting. I try to stay on a fence between attributing bad things to incompetence or malfeasance. And I think that you can have a constellation of interests at play and multiple causes.
You buy that so much can go so wrong for so long without a simpler explanation being maybe that's the way it is intended to be. I mean, I didn't even touch on all of it. You know, the crisis in the Channel, the climate crisis. There are so many other additional facets to it, and you think, if can it really be incompetence by some of the presumably most professional people in the country?
I hear you.
Their inability to deal with it surely has a simpler explanation.
But I think there's something that's kind of rotten with culture, to be honest. slightly random tangent to your monologue, but I want to take issue with the word zero. You know, you talked about net zero. And, you know, we had COVID zero. And, of course, year zero has been floated before. You know, there's something really nihilistic about all of this. It's about a race to the bottom. It's about cherishing scarcity, not abundance. And it's about squashing people. The thing that I do feel is that there's this... that the net is tightening and our options are being reduced. Think about all the festivals this summer that were cashless. You know, choices are being taken away from people. The fact that there's no reason for us to have scarce energy at all right now. We could have abundant energy had it been planned for properly. We're in a glorious heat wave, so that means there's a drought.
I believe we used to call it the summer.
We could have, well, it is a hot one though, isn't it? But we could have plenty of free-flowing water, but the infrastructure is decrepit. And there are documents going back decades that show that the plan was to make us little people use less, rather than provide the infrastructure to give us more.
Do you see it that way, Benjamin? Laura said a net tightening. Do you feel, as I do, that there's a general plan, as Laura says, for us to have less, use less, have fewer choices?
I think there's also a plan to have less people. You know, the old saying, when someone tells you what they believe them. These elites, the people who are now involved in all of this stuff, have spent the last 20, 30, 40 years telling us the world is overpopulated. So why would it be beyond belief that they'd want to depopulate the Earth to some degree? And the way that they do that, it's almost like they want to encourage Armageddon by bringing on the four horses of the apocalypse: famine, death, war and pestilence. And, you know, we've got famine coming soon with all this farming stuff going on. We've got war, this war in Ukraine that they're churning up as readily as they possibly can. You've got death as a result of all of these, and pestilence. You know, we've seen this whole idea about the plague. This we're all somehow responsible for COVID or whatever else it's going to be next. And I think there is that sense that they really want to bring on Armageddon and they really want to depopulate the Earth.
Do you share that, Laura? Do you feel a sense of impending doom almost? I mean, I feel it, but I also feel that the solution to it is almost as obvious as the straight answer. I think we need to find alternative structures. I think we need to establish alternative communities. I think we need to find other ways to be together and to do things the way we want to do them. I'm almost tempted to say we should have an alternative government in waiting.
There's a Scottish island for sale at the moment, and I did think it looked quite tempting. You might have seen it's about the same price as a London flat. We could all club together. Yeah. It's at the same republic of Neil, Benjamin and Laura. I don't know.
Invaded in a week.
I think you know, there are actually plenty of alternative communities that exist already in the world and in this country, but actually you also need infrastructure. I'm not ready to give up on things that have made our culture and our country great. And I mean, I don't know if I buy everything you're both saying. I would rather things are evidenced and to stay sort of sensible. It's very easy to give into fears and to see plots and cabals where they might not exist. But there is a sense, there is definitely a sense that I feel, like I said, the net tightening of how people should make do with less, and that's the answer. There's something really puritanical and unpleasant about that. And I think that it's really important to keep resisting democratically. Do you know one problem we're facing? Let's you mentioned Trump and FBI and the Hunter Biden laptop story. The problem you have is, you know, every mainstream media outlet tried to squash that story about the laptop. They called it Russian disinformation. And while they were trying to squash it, you had Twitter and Facebook suppressing it. I think the New York Post was the only publication that investigated and ran it. So that makes it difficult when corruption isn't exposed. So, you know, actually, thank goodness for a channel like GBNews that exists to put these ideas out.
It almost feels as though we're being invited to see the corruption. Yeah. And for them to feel that it's for those that are corrupt to let us know that they know that we know they're corrupt. It's almost moved to that stage where they're saying, yes, and what about it? What are you going to do about it?
What are you going to do about it? And there is that sense, you know, like the Bond villain always at the end of the film, when he's got Bond trapped, tells him his entire plan because he thinks he's already won. Yes. So what's he lost if he tells him? But then he escapes, of course, and having the knowledge defeats the evil plan. I think that's where we are at this stage. They think they've got us trapped, like an ant under a glass, and they don't care if we know what they're planning to do, because what are you going to do about it? But we're not quite trapped, and I think now that we know, we can do something.
Now that we know we can, yes. Break coming up now, after which, as the cost of living, I prefer to say cost of lockdown crisis, gets worse, we'll look at money and what options are available to people. Be back in a couple of minutes.
My show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Now, with every passing day, it feels like economic disaster looms closer. The cost of lockdown crisis confronts millions of British people with fuel bills that will be simply unaffordable. Coupled to concerns about global food shortages, the outlook for the months ahead looks and feels bleak, to say the least. With all that in mind, it feels like time for an urgent consideration of alternative plans and choices we might consider when it comes to trying to insulate ourselves against some of the financial pain that is presumably or even undoubtedly on its way. My next two guests seem ideally placed to offer advice in these troubled and troubling times. Leah Helper is an expert on cryptocurrencies and also describes herself as an advocate of personal responsibility, individual empowerment and freedom. I love all of that. Also, Justin Urquhart-Stewart in the studio with me is an economist and market commentator. Leah, if I can come to you first down the line there, what scale of financial trouble do you think lies ahead?
Well, thanks for having me on. This is such an important conversation, so really happy to be here. I think, you really just summed it up nicely in terms of soaring energy bills in 2023. Inflation is set to hit 13%, and that's if you believe that low number. But one of the most concerning issues, which I don't think enough people are talking about, is the potential of a central bank digital currency. So this is what is happening globally. China already have their digital yuan. The US are talking about it, and Rishi Sunak and Matt Hancock are also talking about a Brit coin. So this is basically like a cryptocurrency, so a digital version of what we have now, but it will be using blockchain technology, which in simple terms means it's going to be entirely programmable. So if for whatever reason, you might say the wrong thing because we're seeing censorship increasing, then that money can essentially be programmed to be used against you. And a lot of people might say, this is bizarre, this is quite out there. there. But I don't think so. I think it's actually very realistic because during the height of the pandemic, if you weren't vaccinated, certain people and certain shops wouldn't let you go inside. You weren't allowed to go into, football matches, cinemas at one point if you weren't vaccinated. And so with a central bank digital currency, all you have to do really is program that money so that you can't spend it on certain things. We are supposedly living in this climate crisis, and meat apparently is bad for the environment. They want us eating bugs now. So if you, buy too much meat one week and then you want to go fill up your car the next week, you may have actually reached your pollution allowance and then your money gets declined. So essentially, yes, we have soaring inflation, cost of living crisis, but let's not forget the programmable money, which is coming very, very soon and will actually not fix those things.
Justin, I'll come to you now. Leah has gone straight to the heart of that of which I am most afraid, I have to say. The fateful CBDCs, the central bank digital currencies. Should we fear them? Are they coming?
Well, they are coming. I mean, the trouble with cryptocurrencies is actually they're unregulated and it's Wild West stuff, and most of the business is carried out by people you really shouldn't be dealing with. When it's actually controlled by the governments, and bear in mind all crypto is, you have to look at it's the way it operates with. It's have to look at a spider's web. Touch any part of that spider's web, the rest of it knows what's going on. So it's well controlled. Whether that's actually going to help us necessarily with what's actually affecting us over the next 18 months to 2 years.
But what about the notion of notionally having something in an account, but not being able to spend it if your behaviour on a social credit system is deemed to have been unsatisfactory? Is that a realistic fear?
That you're already seeing this happening in China, where people's behaviour will actually then control the amount of railway tickets you can buy and how far you can actually go. And this is actually, really, in my view, extremely frightening. It's any fine, really. I've got Big Brother controlling what's going on. And so that's interesting now. Now put that with the slowdown in the Chinese economy and the amount of social unrest that is occurring there, I think you're going to find they're going to have some very significant difficulties over the next few years. And that's apart from the fact, of course, they've actually got a very serious problem with demographics as well.
Indeed. Leah, Justin mentions there the spider's web analogy with Bitcoin and with blockchain and the fact that everyone can see at all times everything that's happening in that world if you're plugged into it. For people, ordinary people with ordinary incomes and ordinary lifestyles, if I can use the word ordinary in that way, can they realistically use Bitcoin as some or other insulation from financial and economic pain?
So I think it's really important to make a distinction between Bitcoin and all the other different cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin is the only one which doesn't have a centralized founder, centralized entity. There is no central server. So the network is totally decentralized, unlike many other different cryptocurrencies, which have CEOs, they have unlimited supplies, and that totally undermines the entire ethos of Bitcoin. So in terms of, is Bitcoin a hedge against inflation? I still believe it is a hedge against inflation. Right now, Bitcoin is up 400%, more than 400%. Since the March 2020 crash. With inflation soaring, Bitcoin is up 400%. That's really important. Yes, of course, it is down right now from its all-time high of $68,000, but it's actually crashed to its high of the previous bull market. So I have a long-term view when it comes to Bitcoin. I like the technology. I understand that it's decentralized. It has a limited supply, which means, you can't inflate it away like they do with dollars, pounds, and so on, all other fiat currencies. And so ultimately, I believe that if you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, yes, Bitcoin is a very good place to put your money. It's non-confiscatable, which is very important. And we saw what happened in Canada, where, they froze the bank accounts of individuals who didn't want to put foreign substances inside their bodies and wanted to speak up against that. So with Bitcoin, if you hold it in the correct way, totally decentralized outside of a central institution, then your money is non-confiscatable. So to me, yes, it is that perfect hedge against inflation. A lot of people used to look to gold as the hedge against inflation. Gold hasn't really done anything, and undoubtedly we are moving into this new digital world whereby we're global, it's borderless, and so we need a global payments network, a monetary network, which can basically can cater to this new world.
Benjamin, listening to that, do you feel a confidence around a concept like cryptocurrency, and indeed Bitcoin, which, as Leah points out, is not quite like all other cryptos? Do you take solace there?
No, not really. I'm not a believer in Bitcoin. In general, I think it's as much as our current currencies are fiat currencies, I think Bitcoin faces the same problems. It's not really based on anything in a tangible sense. I think what you need to be doing is putting your money into tangible assets. That's the safest place for it. There's a reason why the elite are buying up land and farms and vast tracts. Companies like BlackRock buying houses and properties and land. Bill Gates buying up acres upon acres of farmland across America. These people aren't putting their money into cryptocurrencies, and I think, unfortunately, the cryptocurrencies are not the solution to the forthcoming problems.
Justin, I've read that you have an interest in what seems to be being called financial archaeology. Now, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but I'm going to use it as an excuse to ask you, is the existing economic model that we've all grown up with, been used to for generations, is it coming to the end of its natural life?
Well, it's interesting because the parallel is actually looking at the economy of the Roman Empire and how that worked and how it came to an end. And it came to an end when actually the level of credibility of what was happening actually fell apart. People didn't trust the currency. Talk about fiat currencies, is it backed by anything? What assets have I got? Plus the fact, when the Romans themselves, or whoever was running the area, left, there was no knowledge. People lost the knowledge of what to do. One of the problems we've got now with this in our financial situation is we don't teach people about finance in this country. People don't understand. They leave school, leave university with £50,000 worth of debt and not a diddly squat idea what to do. How do you actually then make money over time? And actually, how do you do it is you have to do it really with a family over time across the generations. Is it going to help us tomorrow? No.
With a family, that's an interesting traditional idea.
Well, I have to say, up in the areas of Glen Urquhart and such like, well, there's no one else to speak to. But you did pass the assets across the generations, and you could plan it in terms of actually making sure that obviously the older people were being looked after, the younger ones needed education. They didn't have enough money individually, but the family could. Now, try and do that on a broader scale today with more technology and a broader range of assets to invest in. So, for instance, things you can invest in which will protect you against inflation now, yes, property and things like that, but basically companies which are paying regular dividends and things like that, you build your money up over time. And it's very boring, but boring, I quite like dull when it comes to investing.
Leah, you mentioned gold, precious metals, places that people have, harbours, safe harbours that people have, have sought sanctuary in troubled times before. But looking at other things, what about supplies of cash? Is our money safe in the banks, basically, or should we be stashing it under the mattress like in the old days?
Look, inflation is soaring. It's going to continue to soar. I think they said we're going to have a recession for the next 5 quarters. I think cash is trash. I don't think putting your money in cash right now is very useful. Like I said, inflation is soaring. You need to be putting your money into assets which you believe will go up. With regards to physical, tangible assets, I'm still quite unsure about that, just given how unpredictable the world is right now. The confiscation of assets are happening. You mentioned BlackRock earlier. BlackRock's an interesting one because BlackRock have actually just started to allow some of their wealthiest clients access to Bitcoin. So we are seeing a lot of smart money starting to provide access to Bitcoin. But overall, I think that Bitcoin is the best hedge against inflation that we have right now. And in terms of where its value comes from the math and code of the network. It also comes from the fact that it literally requires energy to create Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't just come from thin air like fiat currencies. You actually have to mine it in the same way that you mine gold. You mine Bitcoin, of course, not physically, but you do have physical machinery. And so it literally requires money. It requires energy. It requires computational energy. And that's where the value comes from.
Justin, cash is trash?
No, you need some cash because you need to be able to.
But I mean, I'm thinking about the most people. So many people who are just out there trying to keep their heads above water. They've got some money in a bank account. Is their money safe in the bank, or should they take the money out?
Well, they've got to be very careful, because banks do go bust. We only have to look at a banking crisis a few years back. No, they can't go bust, these banks. Well, Royal Bank of Scotland was the biggest bank in the world, and then wasn't. So be very careful. That does not mean you put it under the mattress. No, you find other places to put it in terms of other investments. What investments do you have? The good news is there are lots of things to invest in. good broad asset allocation in lots of different asset classes. Which one's going to be good, which one's going to be bad? Realistically, not many people really know. So you have to work on the assumption that some are good, some are going to be bad. What you can do is look at those with a longer-term track record, which may be paying you a dividend, and that compounding over time we can look at this over, say, 50, 60 years, 5 to 7% a year gives you not a bad return.
I am a bear of very little financial brain, but I keep reading about impending doom for the stock market, impending doom for the bonds market. Are both of those fears credible?
Yeah, there's a very good chance they're going to see some really nasty volatility, and certainly the bond market, which is much bigger than the share market. As for the equity market themselves, part of that, you only have to look at the past few years, has been going through some pretty radical changes. And so what you have to do, if you're frightened of all of these things and you're not willing to invest at all, you can buy a crate of scotch and go and sit in a cave in Scotland and forget it. Otherwise, if you actually do think we're still going to be around in the next few years, you invest in a broad range of all these things and you don't panic about it and you let it steadily compound over time, giving you a dividend. The dividends are much more important than the share prices going up and down. That's where you make money. Trying to guess the next share to go up, that's why we have horse racing.
Don't you think at the moment that one problem is that, like Leia's talking about Bitcoin having gone up 400%, people are after really quick wins. And in fact, in the global financial crisis 2008, I heard that companies were asking for profit and losses every hour. You can't get more short-termist than this. Do you think we need to start thinking more again about value-based investing? Yes. You know, looking at the long-term values of companies.
What do you mean by that, value-based?
Justin would be able to explain it much better than I can. But it's about investing in firms which have got really strong assets, they've got cash, they're paying out long term. It's not about what the share is worth according to the market, it's about what they're making.
Yeah. What they're doing in the economy, how do they participate? And you'll take businesses, for example, it's not a public business, one like John Lewis, for example, which actually was a partnership. Still is a partnership, and they invest or work as a sort of form of cooperative. And there are quite a few cooperatives around, but actually investing in those businesses which are key parts of the economy, you'll carry on needing them. Maybe food producers, could be farmers, but equally financial services as well. But the point you've...
Commodities.
Commodities.
I mean, ESG has driven commodities down, hasn't it, for quite a long time. But surely they're not going to stay down long term. People are going to continue to need oil and wheat and iron and gold.
And if you, therefore, we now educate people about actually all these different asset classes, and they'll be going up and down. And actually, we do come to the stage of saying, this commodity is incredibly cheap now, we're going to carry on. Then you go and buy them. You don't have to be some silly git in red braces trying to work out what to do with that. But if we just taught people the basics of actually how to run your own financial family balance sheet, it would give us confidence as to what's going on.
One thing that worries me
I'm going to have to move on. We're just running out of time. Leia, one last question for you. There's almost an air of optimism in the studio here. Options, at least, for people. Do you have a sense of optimism about the next 6 months, the next year, or do you see storm clouds gathering?
I'm an optimistic person, but unfortunately I don't see optimism in the next 6 months. How can we? We're going into a recession. Inflation is set to hit 13%. But in general, I think, look, I sound like a broken record, I know I do, but I think I'm optimistic about Bitcoin. I'm optimistic about this new technology and how it has the ability to help a lot of people. I also sort of reject the traditional 9-to-5 mentality just because of all the doom that I see coming. I would encourage people to find different ways to make money on the side, whether it's making money online, whether it's whatever it is. I really would encourage people to figure out how they can work remotely with everything that's going on, because I think they dropped the whole COVID narrative very quickly, ready to move on to the next narrative, ready for the next emergency, whether it's a climate emergency, I don't know. But I would really encourage people to figure out how they can be sovereign by themselves, how they can make money regardless of what kind of storm is going on. And I personally find that the digital space to be an incredible way to do that. So if there are any young individuals that this sort of resonates with, then I'd really encourage that.
Nuggets of wisdom there. Leia Helprin, thank you very much. Justin Urquhart-Stewart, thank you. Some cause for optimism lying ahead. Let's hope that's the case. Have to take another break now, after which we'll discuss this week's dramatic developments in the United States of America, where the FBI have raided the home of the former President Donald Trump. Back in 2 minutes.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Last week, FBI agents raided the Florida estate of former US President Donald Trump and seized files marked top secret and described as material that could cause, quote, exceptionally grave damage to US national security. It's the first time an ex-president's home has been raided and searched in this way. Mr. Trump has denied any wrongdoing, saying the files in question were declassified. By any stretch, it's an unprecedented sequence of events. Joining me now to consider the implications is Greg Swenson, Chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Hi, Greg. Thanks for coming in.
Great to be here, Neil.
What's the reaction back home to this latest event?
I mean, it depends which side of the aisle you're on, of course, but it's pretty outrageous. And I think even people that are more moderate or independent are pretty outraged at what happened. You know, and there's the tactical issue, which is, you know, there's suspicion that the Democrats engineered this to distract the voters from the horrible outcomes we've had from 18 months of the Biden administration, inflation in the economy and the border and crime. But there's also the bigger picture, which is much more worrying and saddening, is that, you know, this is another example, not the first one, another example of the apparatus of the state being used to punish or even criminalize a political opponent. That's something we'd expect in Cuba and Venezuela and North Korea, not in the United States.
I'm imagining what the reaction would have been here if Boris Johnson had sent the police to raid Keir Starmer's private address. I'm imagining what the fallout from that would look like.
And even in the States, imagine if they sent, you know, a team of, you know, a SWAT team to Hillary Clinton's residence to take the server, which it turns out, you know, she really was hiding classified documents on the server. It's really the same thing, paper versus a server, but, you know, it really was the same.
Looking at it from the outside, it seems, from what we appear to be being told, to have been an act of incredible stupidity.
Yeah.
For the agency to go in and clear every witness out, and then spend 12 hours, what credibility would they have walking out in the aftermath and saying, here's what we found?
Yeah.
When everyone on the other side is just going to say, well, so you say.
Very little. And I think they parked credibility a long time ago. You know, it goes back to the Russia collusion hoax, the Carter Page FISA warrants. You know, you heard the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, talking about no one's above the law, except that their credibility is zero. You know, they've had, not only have they, you know, had pre-dawn raids on several Trump advisors or employees, former employees, that's been going on for 18 months now. Pre-dawn raids, of course, they alert the media first, so, take out Peter Navarro in leg shackles. I mean, this is really unprecedented, way over the top. I mean, the optimist would say it's overkill, or prosecutorial overkill, but I'm more worried about the bigger picture. And then, of course, you have the backfire and the boomerang effect, and you'll probably see some, retribution when the Republicans win the House after November. And you'd think the Democrats would be a little more insightful about that. But, this, unfortunately, it will get uglier. And again, it goes back to credibility, where the Justice Department really lacks it, not only for what they've done to President Trump for 6 or 7 years, the impeachment hoax, the Russia collusion hoax, all of it, but also what they haven't done. Look at, Joe Biden and his son Hunter, and forget about his problems. More importantly, Russia, China, Ukraine, money going into Hunter Biden's bank account from all 3 of those countries. Not a word about it. They buried it in 2019. The FBI has had the famous laptop since 2019. Buried it, and then 50, Justice Department veterans argued that it was Russia disinformation. These are really troubling political.
Laura, it's amazing stuff, isn't it? It's like listening to someone describe the plot of a badly written movie.
It's horrible. We're living in astonishing times. It's like we're living in a really bad film. I mean, they're going to have to excavate some extremely serious criminal activity. And again, who will believe it now? But if they don't, it's so clear that this is just about short-term political advantage. And in terms of the media, it's just about securing clickbait. Now, there's nothing wrong with opinionated media. GBNews is quite opinionated.
Indeed,
but the media has become so partisan. It's only about creating political echo chambers now. I find this whole story deeply unsettling because I think that what it's doing long-term, all of this, going back to Hunter Biden, like you say, the Russian hoax, is it's eroding trust in institutions that you should be able to trust, whichever side of the political divide you're on. The police, the judiciary, the government, the media. And I think trust is completely eroded. When I was looking up this story, I thought, OK, I'm going to have to balance it out. Shall I look at the New York Times? Shall I look at the New York Post? But I don't feel that you can even get both sides of the story from different media anymore. What you'll find is one media just might not even cover one angle of it because it's not politically convenient.
Benjamin, is it unthinkable that a tactic like this could cross the Atlantic? Could you see this in our future? The apparatus of this, the myrmidons of the state being mobilised against political opponents?
Not at all. We have a tendency, I think, in this country to do things a few years after America. So when something sort of becomes okay in America, very soon after we find that it starts to happen over here as well. Our politics has become very Americanised as a whole. If you look at the way that elections are now run, they're run as presidential elections, even though we don't have a presidential system. We need to have these figureheads, these characters, and people vote according to a leader rather than to their local MP. And in that sense, I do think our politics constantly becomes Americanised. So it is very dangerous, something happening like this in America. And I do think it was entirely politically motivated, this FBI raid. You can't convince me otherwise. I refuse to believe that just before the midterms, after Trump has been out of office for 2 years or however long, they've chosen now, just before the midterms, to have this raid, FBI raid of his home. And do you know what? When Trump came out and he said that they were going to plant stuff, I looked into it. Apparently, they demanded that all the cameras in Mar-a-Lago were shut off during their raid. What possible excuse can you have for shutting off the cameras? Give me one legitimate reason for having the cameras shut off.
That's what I mean. When you look at it from the outside, it looks, apart from anything else, to be completely cack-handed.
Yeah.
Who thought that through and thought this is the one that will get him? Now we won't have to worry about Mr. Trump again after this.
They've been trying for 6 years, and you're right, nothing would be admissible, but I don't think that's their point. Their point is to just, throw a grenade in the room and hope that this blows up the midterms or changes the narrative. And, I think I mentioned earlier, Neil, before the raid, Trump, the Trump-DeSantis gap was narrowing, slowly over time. It was at 43 to 34 before the raid. That's Trump plus 9. Yesterday, the same poll came out, 56 to 18. That's Trump plus 38. That's a 29-point swing. The Democrats, they're either stupid or they have a really, kind of sinister game.
Some strange Machiavellian.
And also look at the context of the week. This came in the same week that they passed the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which is inflationary. It's more intrusive. The government is taking over the private economy, or they're trying to take over the private economy. And then 87,000 freshly minted IRS agents. I mean, this should be really troubling.
How is that going down? I mean, I asked you that, but I'm already aware myself that even on the other side of the aisle, even Democrats seem to be saying we've gone too far.
Yeah, it's not going well. And recall, there's no massive mandate here. You know, LBJ and FDR had massive mandates. Reagan picked up 12 Senate seats, landslide election in 1980. They all had this major momentum for dramatic change. You know, Biden lost 13 House seats. He picked up two or three Senate seats and barely won the election. So, and yet they're still trying this massive, you know, historical transformation
trying to shift tectonic plates
of the society into a statist country, and that's not the nature of America.
They know they've got limited time. They know the next election they probably won't win, and they know if they're going to do it, they've got to do it now.
When it comes to that, I was going to ask you about the IRS and the great swelling of doubling the number of agents. Have Americans not been paying their taxes? I mean, is there a huge unaddressed problem
That's a
here?
great question. I mean, that's completely absurd to suggest that, which the Democrats have. Tax revenues were up 24% this year. I mean, how much do they want to take? It's unbelievable. And by the way, the job postings, I don't know if you've heard this, the job postings for the new IRS agents, they're already up. You have to be comfortable carrying a firearm and comfortable using a firearm. That should be troubling.
A tax?
Yeah.
And
they want to take all of the money.
The target seems to be very ordinary Americans, small businesses, just regular Joes.
This week's tax
Why
hike.
do you need guns and comfortable?
It's all very Sheriff of Nottingham, isn't it?
Of course. And the tax hike in the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, I love that name, the Inflation Reduction Act, the tax hike is very regressive. It's a corporate tax hike that gets passed on to workers and to consumers.
Has an assessment been made that a great sum of money is required for something else? I mean, are they just seeking to milk the cow to get money to do something else with?
They always want more money, but more importantly, they want the state to control the private economy. And that should be really troubling for Americans, and it already is. And only twice in American history have the more than 50% of the voters wanted more government. That was after 9/11, obvious reasons, and after COVID, or during COVID. And it's already swung back. So that narrative has changed. Americans don't want more government. Only this 10% of the progressive climate gentry on the left want more government. It's not the people. And that's what's really troubling, is that the climate elite and the Washington, New York, California gentry are really controlling the narrative. And that's why independents and moderates are all going to vote, not all, but most will vote Republican in November and obviously in 24.
How does, I mean, America, a house divided will not stand, as the man said.
Right.
How does America get back from this hyper-polarised situation where the Republicans and Democrats are so much at each other's throats? The country can't function like this.
No, and there'll be some retribution. You know, you're already seeing the talk about it. Many of these entrenched bureaucrats, unelected, have gone way overboard. They have for a long time. I do think there's going to be a massive shift. This could be a shift just like we had from the Jefferson Revolution in 1800 lasted for 60 years. The Civil War shifted away from that and lasted for another 50 or 60 years until the Depression. Then you had the LBJ and FDR social state growth of the bureaucracy. And that's gone on for a long time with a little break, with Reagan and followed by Clinton. But I think you're going to see, I'm an optimist, you're going to see a real shift away from this massive. And you saw the revolt with the Tea Party.
I need to be surrounded by optimists. Greg Swenson, Republicans.
Great to be here, as usual.
UK.
Neil.
Thank you so much. Got to go into another break, though, after which we'll meet this week's Great Britain, a mother who lost her son to suicide and has now set up a support group for people who are going through the same awful experience. See you soon.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Between now and 8 o'clock, we'll discuss the crisis facing dog rescue centres all across the country. With the price of everything going up, could growing your own food be the answer? I'll speak to a man who's celebrating National Allotments Week. And me and my panellists will dine like kings as we're joined in the studio by a chef to some of the world's biggest celebrities. That's all after the news headlines, brought to you this evening by Bethany Elsey.
Neil, thank you. Good evening. I am Bethany Elsey, here to bring you up to date from the GB newsroom. So Salman Rushdie's alleged attacker has been charged with attempted murder and assault. State police say the suspect, 24-year-old Hadi Mattar from New Jersey, is in custody and that the motive for the attack is not yet known. Earlier today, the author's agent confirmed Mr. Rushdie is on a ventilator and that he may lose an eye after he was repeatedly stabbed on a lecture stage in New York State yesterday. He's faced several death threats over his writing, most notably from Iran's leader in 1989 over the publication of the Satanic Verses. Imam Ibrahim Mogra says Muslims he's spoken to condemn the attack.
No one wanted to see that happen. That's not what Islam condones. We are not allowed to take the law into our own hands. Vigilantism is not permitted. And I don't know of anyone who is rejoicing from news of what has happened.
Rail passengers across the country are facing disruption again as drivers at 9 train companies walk out over jobs, pay and conditions. Members of the ASLEF union joined picket lines in North West London this morning. Several lines are affected, including services along the West Coast, LNER, London Overground and South Eastern. Some parts of the country have no services at all. There are warnings drought conditions in parts of England could last until next year. England is experiencing its driest summer for half a century, and the Environment Agency says it would take weeks' worth of rain to replenish water sources. More extreme heat is expected in the south of the country this weekend, while the north is set to be hit by thunderstorms and floods. Amber weather warnings have been issued. Dr. Simon Boxall is a senior lecturer of oceanography, and he told GB News there could be more droughts in the future. The Welsh Secretary has become the first Cabinet Minister to publicly switch sides in the Tory leadership race, putting his support behind Liz Truss. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, Sir Robert Buckland says he believed the Foreign Secretary's economic policy would help the country through the current cost of living crisis. Speaking to Esther and Philip, Brexit Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg also said he's backing Liz Truss. And an 82-year-old man has climbed the final mountain in his challenge to bag all of Scotland's 282 Munros. Nick Gardner was greeted with a piper and a guard of honour from fellow climbers who cheered him on as he reached the summit of Cairngorm earlier today. The grandfather of four has spent the last 2 years making it his mission to climb the highest peaks and raising money for charities including Alzheimer's Scotland and the Royal Osteoporosis Society. Congrats to him. On TV, online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Now let's get back to Neil.
Thanks, Bethany. That's a fine tale of achievement to round off the news with there. My Great Britain this week is South Tyneside mum Nicola Robertson, who lost her beloved son Tyler to suicide. Tyler was just 22 when he took his own life on July the 14th, 2020. Now Nicola, husband Lee and daughters Libby and Skye have pledged to establish a support group to help others. Nicola joins me now. Hello, Nicola.
Hi.
Thank you for joining me. It's an important conversation to have, I think. Can I ask you, first of all, just to tell me about Tyler?
He was 22. He was just qualified as an electrician. He was just outgoing, bubbly, really sensitive. Just a normal Jack the Lad. That's how everybody knew Tyler. He was always a class clown at school.
So having said that, you know, the class clown, everyone knew him, was there an indication that he was struggling as badly as he obviously was?
There was a few weeks before he did decide to take his own life. He rang the police task for help 3 weeks prior to his death, and the police took him to the local hospital, but obviously they wouldn't let us go down to see him or nothing due to COVID. And then he was only in hospital about an hour, but in the meantime I'd rang E&E to explain how we'd been and stuff in the prior weeks. And the nurse that I spoke to at the hospital told us that Tyler was an adult. And obviously, more or less, it had nothing to do with me. And I said, at the end of the day, he's my vulnerable adult. And I was just more or less dismissed. So an hour later, Tyler rang us and said, Mum, can you come and pick us up? And I said, well, have you seen anybody? And he said, oh, they've given us a list of phone numbers to ring. So I said, right. So when he came home, he went through all his list of phone numbers. And some of them were closed due to COVID. Some of the numbers didn't even exist. That was on this form. He rang his GP on the Monday. Them gave him antidepressants. And then a fortnight later, he got another job interview because he'd been laid off due to COVID. So he went back down to work in London with him being an electrician. He was a shop fitter. So he went down on the Monday and he seemed much better in himself. I knew he wasn't right, but he seemed a lot happier than what he had been. And the following Monday was the last time I spoke to him. And he seemed fine. He said he was going out with the lads for a couple of pints from work. And I told him to be careful. He was messaging us during the night. Then come the Tuesday morning, I couldn't get in touch with him. And I don't know, just as a mum, I just had a gut feeling that he wasn't going to come home. I kept saying to my husband, you're going to have to ring his boss. You're going to have to ring his boss. I don't think he's coming home. he says, "Don't be stupid, man. He's probably just went out and slept in and not got up on the Tuesday morning." So come by the Tuesday night, I still couldn't get in touch with him. So the Wednesday morning, his dad rang his boss and said, "Look, can you go around? Have you heard anything off Tyler? His mum is worried. She can't get in touch with him." And as his dad was on his phone to his boss had just found him and he was there with the police.
What do you think might have made a difference that mattered for Tyler? And I suppose what I'm asking really is what will the group that you're endeavouring to establish seek to provide that wasn't there for Tyler?
The group's more for people that's lost somebody to suicide. I think it's easier to talk to somebody who's experienced it, like a loss of suicide, rather than just talk to somebody who hasn't been there and hasn't experienced it. It's all right for somebody to say to me, "Oh yeah, I know how you feel. I lost my nana 6 months ago." This nana might have been 86 and had an illness or something, like a terminal illness. But to me, suicide is a total different loss. Not that I empathise for people who's lost people, but just suicide is a totally different.
It must be difficult to talk about it, Nicola, I suppose, because there always has been, and I presume there might always be, a stigma associated that hangs around suicide, which I presume makes it harder for families left behind to talk about it out with the family.
To me, the way I look at it is, if that's what Tyler's wanted, then I have to respect his wishes.
What will you be doing? What will the group be doing? I mean, are you set up already? Do you have support? Is there anything that viewers can do to get behind the group?
I've set a GoFundMe page up, just obviously to help facilitate, such as advertising and paying for rent on a room. And I thought maybe it's just like little touches. If it was somebody's anniversary coming up, just getting a card and a little bunch of flowers. Just so everybody who's experiencing, just get together and everybody knows how everybody else is feeling. I'm obviously 2 years down the lane with Tyler now. There might be somebody that goes to the group that's 7 years down the lane, 7 weeks down the lane.
What's been the response?
Obviously there's all these stages that... What's that, sorry?
What's been the response that you've had so far when you've reached out and made it known that you're available and that you're endeavouring to hold out a hand, a comforting hand to others? What response have you had?
Well, I set a Facebook page up called Safe, and I've had an excellent response to that, and I've had loads of private messages of people who's lost someone to suicide, whether it be their siblings, sons, daughters, husbands, wives, and they say that they find it easier to talk to somebody who's been in the same situation rather than going and seeing, I don't know, maybe he's a bereavement counsellor who's never been in that situation.
Nicola, I think it's so important to listen to your story, and so moving. The grief that's still there, that in your voice and on your face. I think it's so important for people to know that these things do happen within families, and the necessity to have people to talk with. To have people listen to the story, I think is so important, and I think it's why what you're doing is so courageous to be still in the middle of something so devastating, and from that place to be reaching out to help others. It says something very important, very meaningful about your character.
If I could just help one person, to me, Taylor hasn't died for nothing. I kind of bring him no matter what I do, even though I would love to.
Oh, we've lost Nicola there. I'm sure you'll agree. A devastating story, but also I think a story that everyone can identify with, and every parent, every brother to a brother, sister to a brother, everyone can identify with and imagine what Nicola and her family have been going through, and yet to be within that, to be in that dark place and reach out to try and help others is very significant. Laura, it's hard to listen to, isn't it?
It was really hard to listen to. Very, very, very painful, because you can't really imagine anything worse than somebody you love, and you don't love anybody more than your children.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody you love feeling that they couldn't live, that their life's not worth living. So it was incredibly saddening listening to her, but also humbling. And there's something, kind of rock solidly reassuring about the human spirit, that people go on and try to make something good, so it doesn't feel like that dark chapter is in vain. I think that's a really good idea for a group, to give people that, that community. Because I think she's probably right. Probably no one can know what it's like to experience somebody to suicide unless they've been through it.
So such a dark topic to address, isn't it, Benjamin? To have to tell people that a loved one, especially a young loved one, has felt there was no option for them but to take their own life. It's so difficult, and there is a stigma attached to talking about that.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult, and I think this is one of the reasons why during the lockdowns and what happened over 2 years, it was so bad, and why I would never accept that it was about saving lives, because the amount of people who were pushed towards things like suicide because of, not just because they couldn't access the services for help, for mental health services, but also the isolation caused by lockdown, the fact that people couldn't see their friends or their families, the fact that they lost their jobs, they lost their livelihoods, and all of these factors drove people into that very dark place where a lot of people unfortunately did take their own lives. And to say that that was all in the name of saving lives is one of the things that really rankles for me.
It's that fragility of life, isn't it? Nicola was describing our son Tyler as, a Jack the Lad, and that, he was, he had friends, he had been working, he had a social life, and yet, it's such a soap bubble of fragility of life, isn't it? And we don't know what's going on in other people's lives, going on inside their heads, and that people can be pushed to reach that point. Yeah. It's important to be mindful of that, I think. Yes, I don't think we're going to be able to get Nicola back. I'm going to just, if Nicola's watching, it's a segment dedicated to people who in extremis reach out, try to rise above whatever darkness they've found themselves within, and that Nicola and her family have decided that in the midst of all their grief, to try and help others in the same situation. That's what community, that's what family, and that's what good people are all about. So we'll wish Nicola and family all the very best of luck with their endeavour. Now, as the owner of 2 Irish wolfhounds of great stature, I am unashamedly devoted to dogs of all shapes and sizes. So the news last week that workers in a dog rescue centre in Manchester were describing their place of work as the most depressing on earth fairly caught my attention. Here to explain the challenge facing dog rescue centres up and down the country is Frankie Howard, a canine behaviour expert at Dogs for Rescue. Hello Frankie, how are you?
Hi there Neil, I'm grand, thanks for having me on.
No, now tell me, what is it that's happening? Tell me, I think, first of all, what's happening at this specific centre in Manchester that you're connected to.
Yeah, so what's happening here is the same across the country, across the UK and across Ireland. I'm very privileged that I get to be in a place surrounded by dogs all the time, and it should be the happiest place on earth. But unfortunately, at the moment, there's an epidemic of dogs needing to come back into rescue. Part of this is due to obviously the rise in COVID puppies. Whenever people had more time at home, they've suddenly realised they don't have the time for the dogs. My job has gone from working and training dogs to get into homes, to basically answering the phone every day and having to turn people away because there's just not the space at the rescue to take in anymore. And that's why, as much as it's a job that I love, it has quickly become quite depressing to be here.
What happens, when a dog centre is at capacity and people come forward with a dog that they need to be rehomed or that they need to give up and you can't take it? What happens to that animal?
So oftentimes the sad reality is that a lot of those animals get put to sleep. Now we're very fortunate that our rescue has a no-kill policy, so an animal's never going to be put to sleep just to make room for another animal. But a shocking statistic is 2.7 million animals enter UK shelters every year, and about 2,000 animals are put to sleep every day in UK shelters to make space, because if people can't keep them and they can't get them into rescues, the rescues end up euthanizing dogs, which they would deem kennel blockers, basically to make room for other dogs. And it's really sad because that's somebody's life, and we're putting them to sleep because there's not enough space, but we keep pumping out more and more dogs as this problem goes on.
So there was a perfect storm, wasn't there, during lockdown? People were looking for a companionship, and a lot of families took on a pet, took on a dog, a pup, I suppose, to entertain the children during lockdown. Now people have gone, on furlough. People then subsequently went back to work, of course, and the dog became, a bit more of a problem. And then there's the burgeoning cost of living, cost of lockdown crisis, putting people's household budgets, under, unprecedented pressure. So I mean, what kind of additional scale of problem are centres like your own having to deal with?
Honestly, I've been working with animals for about 10 years, and although there's always been dogs that need to come in, I've gone from 1 or 2 phone calls a week, people asking to bring dogs in, to dozens every single day. And it can be as heartbreaking as, if you don't take this dog from me by the end of the day, we're going to have to put them to sleep. And that's something that's quite hard to detach from. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, that when over the COVID crisis and people were at home, people wanted a dog. The puppy farming industry made more money during COVID than the illegal drug trade. And because there's such a profit to be made from breeding these animals, it continues to happen. And because of the cost of living as well, obviously it can be quite a struggle for people to take on a dog. One of the things that we're doing at our rescue is, if anyone's in a position to foster a dog, whether that's short term for a couple of weeks or whether that's for a couple of months to help us free up space, we're going to cover the cost of food, any medical bills, training with ourselves if you need any help with training, beds, crates, whatever the dog may need. Because we know that there are people out there that want to help, but because of the cost of living, it can be quite difficult to do so. And we don't want that to be something that stops people from reaching out if they are in a position to help.
Laura, it's sometimes difficult to reconcile stories like this with the traditional notion that we are a nation of animal lovers, isn't it? This idea that so many people took on dogs, and then it's the moment they become inconvenient, they just want to offload them.
It doesn't surprise me. I mean, I have a dog, and she's not my first dog. I love dogs, but they're a lot of work. They are a lot of work. So people got a dog during this bubble of lockdown, where they're at home, they're learning to make bread and forest school their children and learn a language and get a puppy. And then you go back to work and it's like, sheesh, what am I going to do with the dog? Well, it's a lot of work, It's like a child that never grows up. But, during World War II, many, many thousands of dogs were exterminated in this country because they thought there'd be a food shortage. People can turn on their pets, but that's a terrible story. I feel like I should foster a dog now. Not sure that my life needs another dog in it, but...
Frankie, are you getting uptake on this? I'm fascinated by this idea of foster homes for dogs. Are people coming forward and taking dogs in?
So we're getting a few. The problem is our rescue is kennel free, which is amazing. It means that the dogs don't spend all day in kennels. They're free to run in packs and they're free to kind of be dogs. But because of that, we sort of specialise in dogs that maybe haven't been coping in traditional kennel-based rescue. So some of our dogs have behavioural problems. And although we're getting a lot of applicants looking for dogs, it's maybe people that haven't had a dog before, or maybe had a really simple, straightforward from puppy dog and that hasn't had any quirks. And one of the other reasons for dogs coming in here so often in the numbers that they are is like over COVID, if you want to go buy a puppy and you know that come the end of COVID, you're going to be working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, whenever you go to a breeder, as long as you've got the money, doesn't matter what your lifestyle is like. But the difference with a rescue, and not just ourselves, rescues up and down the country, is that if you come and you tell me you're working 60 hours a week, we're not going to give you a dog with severe separation anxiety. So we're just encouraging people to, whether it's ourselves or one of your local rescues, you know, if you can adopt, fantastic. We always say two dogs is better than one, sorry. And if you can't adopt, foster. If you can't foster, volunteer. If you can't volunteer, donate, share pages, like pages. It's just about getting these dogs out into the public eye, because there'll be a home out there for every single dog that we've got.
Benjamin, it never ceases to amaze me, the thoughtlessness of people.
Yeah.
You know, that people, given the break of furlough and lockdown, that they must have known would come to an end, and that they would be going back to their everyday lives.
People are very short-sighted.
Take on a living creature.
Yeah.
Without a long-term thought in their head.
Well, people are very short-sighted. If you look at the way that people think about pretty much any issue, they think in terms of 3 months at most a lot of the time. People very rarely plan for the future. And I think one of the things, you know, it's the two sides of the coin. It's the first part was lockdown. They went, great, we've got all this free time, we'll get a dog, and, you know, great. So they get the dog, and now we're at the other end of that with the cost of living crisis, and they're now going, the bills are going up, okay, we've got another mouth to feed, we can get rid of that. We've got to cut where we can cut, and that's the first place they go. It's almost like last in, first out sort of mentality.
Frankie, is it a situation, you mentioned the puppy farms and all the rest of it, are we in need of action? Are there steps that could be taken to better ensure the well-being of animals in this country? Yeah.
So we're quite lucky that this is one of the few problems in the world that is completely within our control to change. Obviously, you can look at like trying to change legislation and things like that, but I'm a big believer in that people have control over a lot more than we think that we do. And whenever it comes to deciding to get a dog, just not supporting breeders, trying to convince your friends and family to do the same thing. Like with 2,000 animals being put to sleep every single day in UK rescues, there's no need to go out and continue this trade, because my last rescue, we used to work with a lot of puppy farm dogs seized from Ireland, and the conditions would make any decent human sick to their stomach. And often whenever you buy from a breeder, if you're finding them on Facebook, you're finding them on Gumtree, things like that, and they put up a front, it looks a lot nicer than it is, but the reality is quite harsh. And I think if people realised how harsh it was, they wouldn't support it. And whenever you want a dog, or if you know any friends or family that do want, come to a rescue. Like people worry that when you come to a rescue, they're going to have behavioural problems. You can't get puppies, and I want this particular breed. There's no way a rescue is going to have it. I always wanted a black German Shepherd puppy, and I waited, and a black German Shepherd puppy came into the rescue I was working in. You can get designer dogs. We had Irish Wolfhounds in one of the rescues I worked at. Like any dog you want, any age, any kind of beginner level, you can get. And whenever you go to a rescue, again, they're going to make sure that you're paired up with a dog that's appropriate for you, rather than if you're working 60 hours, don't get a working collie. But if you're working 60 hours, maybe, a dog that just wants a sofa to sleep on in a retirement home would be ideal. And because it's not for a profit in the rescue, it's always going to be about the dog. Where if you go to a breeder, no matter how much money no matter what problems you have in your life or your lifestyle doesn't match up, as long as you've got the money, the dog's yours. So we can completely control this, but we just need to stop going to breeders. There's not enough legislation on people that do breed dogs. The welfare checks are absolutely terrible. They're infrequent. They get a heads up when welfare is coming out to check them. It's quite easy to cover things up when you've got a week's notice, but it's definitely within our power to make a difference here.
Frankie, it's a noble job that you're doing. Spending your time taking care of these devoted creatures, man's best friend, and all of that. So I can only hope that at some point in the not too distant future, we as a nation, as a species, learn to take a bit more responsibility for those animals with whom we share our lives. Thank you for now, Frankie.
Thank you so much, Neil. Appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. After the break, I'll speak to 3 inspirational children who are helping to combat mental illness in young people. I'll see you in 2 minutes.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Every week in this country, 120 people take their own lives. 120. Already tonight, we've heard from South Tyneside mum Nicola Robertson, whose 22-year-old son took his own life 2 years ago. My next guests represent a charity set up by school children in Lancashire with the aim of drawing more attention to the tragic toll being taken in Britain by suicide. Rebecca Jane, CEO of the Children's Charity, joins me now, along with daughter Paris and Lucy and Jess. Hello all. Oh look, it's working, you're all there.
Hi.
That's lovely, you're all here. If I can come to you first, Rebecca, I understand you've come up together with a powerful visual display in the town of Clitheroe to help get your message out there. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Children's Charity is a charity run by children for children, and their one mission is to come up with pilots and projects and ideas that help combat mental illness in young people. So yes, quite a while ago, probably actually about 2 months ago, Ribblesdale High School, the children's charity there, the children came up with a project to raise awareness of suicide, because it was something that they felt very passionate about and that they didn't know enough about. Mm-hmm. So what they came up with was that they wanted to display 120 pairs of shoes, because 120 people take their lives every week. The children then sought permission from the Town Council of Clitheroe. Simon O'Rourke, who was an incredible support for the kids, he came and saw them and talked to them. He has some very personal reasons as well to support the project, but he actually gave them permission to take over the Christmas tree poles that line the entire high street of Clitheroe. So the project spans the whole town. There are now 120 pairs of shoes displayed across the town, and the kids from Blessed Trinity's Children's Charity were the kids that actually did the project. And as you can see here, this was us last Sunday, and we got all of the 120 shoes up, and the response has been very overwhelming, to say the least.
Paris, if I can ask you, what brought your class, your school's attention to this very important subject? How were you made aware of these figures, these statistics?
Sort of through our friends, and you'll hear little bits around school sort of mentioning, oh, this person is going through a difficult time at the minute. And just hearing little things, you do become very aware, especially within your friend group, of what they're going through, realising actually it's a much bigger problem than everybody thinks.
And then we got the official statistics as well. We actually got the most recent ones that were done over a snapshot of 3 months in 2022, which has changed from 2019. It was 111 people every week, and now it's 120 every week.
Lucy, are you there? Lucy, can I ask you what do you think that the charity can do to help all people your age, but the wider community, to better understand and communicate and get the message across about the importance of paying attention to our mental health?
I think raising awareness is very powerful. I mean, it educates people about mental health topics. And I think once people are educated, it encourages them to help participate in bringing a positive change.
And Jess, if I can come to you. Oh, I think we've lost Jess. Rebecca, in that case, I see in the notes, or I read in the notes around this subject, that suicide rates in Lancashire are among the highest in England.
Yeah, third highest.
Why would that?
And Cumbria combined, yeah.
Why would that be? Is there any understanding why different regions and different parts of the country, people find themselves suffering more or less?
Yeah, I think that obviously we're a very northern town. We have generations of people that have all grown up with the mentality of, big boys don't cry, and that we need to hide our feelings and things like that. And so I think that the northern element is one thing. I think that the other thing is the fact that services are massively overwhelmed. I actually own a private mental health clinic which has funded this project for the children, because actually, with all due respect to the NHS, it is currently a 9-month waiting list in local areas. And unfortunately, people need to be getting help far quicker than that. And in my opinion, within 7 days. So I think that those two elements combined are probably the reason why we have such high statistics. We're not the type of people to talk openly about mental health. We're getting better, but predominantly, yes, I think that a lot of our people just don't do that.
Which group in the population, if not only in Lancashire, but in the country as a whole, which group is most at risk?
I think, obviously men are, she's the biggest killer of men under the age of, I think it's the early 50s. However, what I will say is I think that children are actually at risk, because what we're seeing now, the Children's Charity, the first week that we go into the schools and we talk to the kids, because we've created this because I don't believe that adults should be leading the way in children's mental health care. I think children should be doing it. And in our first week, we go in there and we throw the kids in at the deep end and we say, what affects you? What do you need help with? And what is life like as a child? Because as a young person, should I say, not as a child, she doesn't look like a child next to me, does she? But what I will say is that first session is very raw. They talk to us about things that adults today wouldn't even consider. Gender identity is a big problem for kids today. Sexuality, bullying is more prevalent than I've ever actually known. So I actually think that the young people of today are probably one of the biggest risk factors that there are going. And I think that if we start to educate them sooner and get them talking about it, hopefully we might be able to change the path that they're on. Have we not done that to children though in the last just a few years, bringing into school subjects and having kids, youngsters, contemplate things that I was never invited to think about for, another 10 years or more beyond the age that some of these youngsters are now. It's a self-inflicted wound, is it not, that we've brought onto school children? It's a tough stance, and I do appreciate your opinion because I think it's a really difficult topic to be talking about. Before we actually started our work with the kids directly, I would have probably had the same stance as you. But actually, when I talk to the kids, I hear about their struggles, I hear about what they deal with and their reasonings and methodology behind it all. I actually do have now a little bit of a different view, but also I do think that there has to be some reasoning with it. And I think that if we go too far down a woke avenue, then that'll create a whole other amount of different problems. We have to be really careful and tread a really fine line with it. I don't think it's entirely self-inflicted. I don't think that we've helped ourselves, because I think as adults we've all gone, oh my goodness, panic, let the kids do whatever they want. And I think that there is now more reasoning coming through. There's more thought process behind it. And actually, I'd invite you to come and meet some of our kids and to talk to them about it and see what you think about that. See if we change your mind.
Sure. Jess, I think Jess is back. Is it making a difference? Is it making a difference for you in your friend group, in your class? Do you find that you're being encouraged and finding it easier to talk about these things now than you did before?
Well, a couple of years ago, it was a bit more quiet about mental health and people not really wanting to talk about it. But I think especially since after lockdown, everyone's become a bit more free to talk about it and more active.
Oh, I think we've lost Jess again. We have. Look, it's been excellent to hear all of those stories from Rebecca, from Paris, from Lucy and from Jess. Wish them all the best with their efforts with that charity. Thanks very much, ladies. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks.
Good stuff. Now, threatened food shortages are all over the news now. All across Europe, farmers are up in arms, protesting against all manner of government restrictions on farming practices. With that in mind, it seems well worth noting that this month sees National Allotments Week, a time to focus on the time-honoured commitment shown by many to growing their own fruit and veg. Is there anything better, I ask, more life-affirming than sitting down to a meal consisting in whole or in part of food raised by our own fair hands? Joining me now to celebrate the simple, modest wonder of the allotment is Terry Dickinson from the National Allotment Association. Good evening, Terry. Thank you for joining me.
Good evening. Thank you.
How long has there been a tradition of allotment holding in this country of ours?
Wow, it goes back. I think you can talk back into the 1700s. I think there's a book I'm about to read. The National Allotment Society, you can see on my shirt, we've been around for more than 90 years. That was when the National Allotment Society was formulated into a single body to look after allotments in this country.
And how
we've
many
been around allotments?
Are allotments in good shape? Are there as many as there ever were? Are there more or are there fewer?
There are allotments. We lose allotments every year for various reasons, but it's not. We do open new allotments in certain parts of the country. It's easier in some parts than others. It's not all gloom and doom. On a small level, all construction companies are now, as part of their plans, have to incorporate some allotment space in their new developments. And we work with them on that. That's kind of the new thing. The allotments are... The demand for allotments is at an all-time high. I'm the guy for... my region is the London region, and it's calculated... University College in London calculated a couple of years ago there were 300,000 people on the waiting lists. At the moment, it's a difficult year. It's a very difficult year for everybody, and allotment people as well. I go around allotments in London. I see some allotments which I'm absolutely envious of, and I can go to others, mine included, which look like a bit of a dirt bath at the moment. It's just whether you've got access to water at the moment or not. Okay. Allotments are in good heart. It's the allotments. The National Society is getting bigger and more active. We get new members from around the country all the time, and generally speaking, councils are for allotments. One of the people that we have a great deal of sympathy for is the local allotment officer. In this day and age, he's probably got 3 jobs. A few years ago, I know a lady in London who runs all the allotments for one borough herself. 5 years ago, I think the team was 5. They're all under pressure, but when we get allotment officers together, we can understand the sort of burdens they're under, the time constraints they're under, and we work with them. But yeah, it's not. There's always going to be allotments going. We got a kind of a reputation for only saying no to closing allotments. That's not quite right. Sometimes it's inevitable, but we fight to get land to replace it, and we fight hard to replace the allotments if they are going.
Laura, there's something life-affirming, don't you think? Especially in these times when we're being told about, food shortages and, there's so much change and uncertainty. The ability to know that there's a plot of land, however small, that's yours and that you can actually grow fruit and veg there. There's something almost magical about that.
Absolutely. If I had an allotment, though, I'd like to keep chickens on it because I eat eggs every day and I love chickens. So I'd probably just have a big chicken coop on my allotment. But the other thing people could do is foraging. I picked a big bowl of blackberries today. We're in blackberry season. There's nature's allotment out there too.
Does that ability to grow your own appeal to you?
Absolutely. I think certainly with the forthcoming crisis around food security, with farms, reducing and a lot of farmland actually being turned into land for building on, we're seeing a lower yield across this country for self-sustainability in terms of food. So I think being able to grow your own food is so important. But unfortunately, a lot of people now live in flats where, in the previous generations, they would have had an outdoor space, they would have had gardens, and now I think there's going to be more of a call for it. But I think what's actually happening is a lot of old allotments are being turned into land for flats because they tend to be in cities, they tend to be in areas which are desirable for property, and so it's going the wrong way. But they're a great tradition. I think they actually go back even further than 1700s. I think the Normans established the first allotments when they landed in 1066.
Goodness. Terry, what are the benefits? I mean, obviously, if you have an allotment and you know what you're doing, you can produce, you can augment the family table and all the rest of it. But I can only imagine that there are all manner of other benefits, physical and mental and psychological.
Absolutely. Number one, you grow your own food. As you say, it's life-affirming. Allotment societies, I say, are probably the most diverse, culturally diverse organisations you're going to get in one place. We have, in this country nowadays, on my own allotment where I am, it's not a large allotment, we have people...
Oh, we have had a small technical problem. Do you think it's going to be something that's increasingly important for people? I mean, I know back home, I live in Stirling, and my wife in particular has become more and more forthright about the need for us to be growing more of our own fruit and vegetables. Do you think that's something that's going to get into more and more people's mindsets? Is it part of people adapting to a changing society?
Maybe, but it's a very different direction for society. I mean, personally, I see the appeal of being a small holder, but I don't want to be. I don't really want to grow my own food. I want to be in the communication industry and buy food. But I can definitely see it appealing to some people. I mean, actually, I think it's quite hard to buy enough food to make a dent into your shopping bill. But I think you're talking about it being life-affirming. I think it's more of an emotional thing than a true financial benefit.
Terry, I think Terry's back with us. I think he's back. Terry, I'm thinking it also fosters community. I'm imagining as I hurtle past allotments on one train after another, that's usually when I see allotments. They're usually beside railway lines. And I always imagine that they're little worlds unto themselves where people can get away from the daily grind or other commitments that they have and immerse themselves perhaps in the world of the allotments.
Yeah, many people come to the allotments and forget everything else. It's a great place to be. But there's a kind of a law in allotment land. If you want to be left alone, you should be left alone. If you want to join in with other people, you join in with other people. You can get all kinds of things. Obviously, there's swapping goes on. Although allotments were the full-size allotment was designed to let a family of four grow food for a year. It's difficult you've got to be really good to do that. What people do these days is you'll find somebody who says, I don't buy potatoes for 9 months of the year. I don't buy onions ever during the year. Or I don't ever buy garlic during the year. And then the tomatoes, obviously, I don't buy tomatoes in the second half of the summer. And then you've got the communities that grow for vast. I say that the model is a worldwide culture for a worldwide community now. Every kind of growth goes on allotments. There's goods like you've never seen. There's beans like you've never seen. The range is incredible. One of the reasons I started allotments is because I can grow, and people on allotments grow varieties that they can't buy. You can grow certain types of pumpkins that you can't buy. You can grow certain types of potatoes that you can't buy regularly, and you can grow certain types of beans that you can't buy. So it gives you the chance for the variety. During lockdown, it saved many people's lives. We've been told time and time again.
Terry, it's wonderful stuff.
We kept the government kept the allotments open.
I have to say, Terry, the whole idea of it being idyllic is only intensified with the fact that you're actually even bathed in a golden light as I'm speaking to you. The whole thing, the whole idea. I tell you now, if people aren't paying attention to allotments and growing their own now, my prediction is in the short to medium future, more and more people will be starting to think in old and traditional ways. Terry Dickinson from the National Allotments Association, thank you very much for joining me this evening.
Thank you.
After the break, the personal chef to one of Hollywood's biggest stars will join us in the studio. Don't go away.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live, while my guest Benjamin sneaks back into the studio thinking I can't see him. My final guest this evening has made a name for himself as the chef to A-list actors who seek him out when they need dietary help to look the part. King Inakemi, also known as King the Chef, was called in most recently by Idris Elba to help him get in the right physical shape for his latest movie, a thriller called Beast, set in South Africa. King the Chef joins me now. Good evening. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. How are you?
You were going to cook for us, but we're kind of tight for time.
I know, unfortunately, time constraints and whatnot. So I want to do a great job, so I'll come back and... If you guys allow me, I'll come back and set it off for you.
Tell us about the movie and particularly how you were able to help Idris fit the part.
God, where do I start?
What's the movie about?
So the movie is about, obviously you guys have seen there's a lion involved. Think Jaws with a lion.
Okay.
Now, I don't want to spoil it, so I'll just say that. Fortunately enough, I had the opportunity to see it at the premiere in New York the other day, so it is fantastic. And it's not just the thrill part of it. There is a lovely family storyline involved as well. You know, he's got 2 daughters and stuff.
And what did you do? What were you feeding them to make them?
So, I mean, the ladies will thank me for this. I'll take the credit for this. Idris, don't call me out on this, but he looks incredible in the film. There were times where obviously, you know, he's chasing after a lion. I'm not going to spoil anything. So, you know, there were days where his diet had to be carbon enriched, a lot of protein, you know, fish, and we were based in South Africa, so, you know, great for fish, great for produce. So I was able to change his diet according to, you know...
footage of you on there.
Oh, great, fantastic. So it was great to, you know, I had the opportunity to change his diet according to, you know, where we were and what was required.
But were you making him look different?
So for this particular role, what he wanted and what was asked of me was to give him a little bit of body, right? So
I thought you just had a bit of body.
He's got body, man. He's got body, you know. But you know, we gotta, you know, do what we gotta do. So you know, I had to introduce things. Like, I put him on a pescatarian diet for this film. So you know, he had a protein-enriched diet. He looks great. When you guys watch the film, you're gonna thank me for it. So.
What is your culinary background? How did cooking happen to you?
So I'm West African, Nigerian. Learned to cook in the home, obviously. Parents, mum, dad. My earliest memory of cooking is a memory of my dad cooking a big Sunday breakfast, you know, the beans, the eggs, the sausage, and I was a daddy's boy. So what he did, I wanted to do. That's my earliest memory of cooking. I was about 6 or 7. But then mum obviously is the matriarch. So her hand is where I've taken my culinary love from, if you like. And now I've turned it into a career, so...
Is there something about the way you cook and the dishes that you tend to cook that lends itself to this offshoot you've found with helping the stars get into shape for parts?
Absolutely. I think culturally, in terms of the background, you know, Idris is West African as well, so food-wise, it's similar. He's used to this, you know, the palate that I'm used to. He's used to the flavours and the textures that I cook, that we all grew up with. So those are what I infuse into diets for the likes of Idris or, let's say, a Steve McQueen or, you know, the list goes on and on and on. But there is a cultural reference in there, yeah.
What did you have to deny Idris that he wanted to eat, that you had to get him away from?
You guys are trying to drag all this stuff out of me, right? So I will tell you this, Idris loved steak, right? And for this particular film, I was like, all right, you do love steak, but we're gonna have to get off the steaks because this is what you want to look like. I've got to, yes, you want to be bulky, but you know, you don't want to be too. So we've got to lean you down a bit. So I had him on a pescatarian diet first. So the duration... Fish. Duration of South Africa, no steaks.
So hang on, steak makes you really muscly then?
It does, it makes you more... It's lean protein, isn't it?
He didn't want to be too muscly, so not too much steak.
Because again, I don't want to spoil the film for you, but his role is not an athlete.
Tell me more about when we get away from the actors, when we get back to King Chef, what is your approach? Can you describe your cooking philosophy?
My approach is honest, it's unapologetic, it's based off of my cultural background, where I grew up in Northwest London, Harlesden. It's a melting pot, it's a diaspora, a melting pot of African, West Indian, Asian. There's a culmination in what I do now. It comes out in what I do now. You know, my culinary taste comes from all these references.
So if you were cooking for us, if you were cooking for me now, what would be the ideal table that you would put together?
First, I'd have to know your dietaries. Do you have any dietaries?
Eat everything and anything.
You eat everything and everything. Right, fantastic. So what I was going to cook for you guys, I'll tell you what I was going to cook for you guys this evening. So this is one of the meals that is my go-to for a lot of well-known people. It's a plantain taco. Do you know what a plantain is?
Yeah. Looks like a banana.
Looks like a banana, yeah, precisely. And it's dehydrated, so it's not cooked, essentially. Still keeps all the nutrients involved, and then I stuff it with a whole bunch of stuff, like oyster mushrooms, okra, alfalfa, broccoli sprouts, micro coriander. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can put in there, but
Lovely
it's
stuff. As you say,
so filling.
King Chef, I'm going to have you back. You promise you'll come back.
I promise to
Actually,
come back.
You'll go through the whole.
I promise to come back. I promise to come back.
Because I'm afraid, with all of that as a possibility and a probability for the future, that's all from me on Neil Oliver Live. Thanks to the panel, Benjamin Loughnane, Laura Dodsworth, King Chef. So disappointed we didn't get to taste your food. Next up, it's Ministry of Offence.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me!
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, good afternoon. You're watching GB News. I'm Bethany Elsey, here to bring you up to date from the newsroom. So Salman Rushdie's alleged attacker has been charged with attempted murder and assault. State police say the suspect, 24-year-old Hadi Mattar from New Jersey, is in custody and that the motive for the attack is not yet known. Earlier today, the author's agent confirmed Mr. Rushdie is on a ventilator and that he may lose an eye after he was repeatedly stabbed on a lecture stage in New York State yesterday. He's faced several death threats over his writing, most notably from Iran's leader in 1989 over the publication of the Satanic Verses. Imam Ibrahim Mogra says Muslims he's spoken to condemned the attack.
No one wanted